Good morning, everybody. Welcome to Jet Radio 1400. I'm Alan Carpenter. We have in the studio Josh Karsinski from Stan's Garden Center. Good morning, Josh.
The mayor plans.
Yeah, the mayor.
I had to step in for the mayor.
You stepped in for the mayor, who is not feeling well today, and we hope he has a fast recovery. But there are really nasty viruses going around town. So
I used
have
to
one,
say
the mayor has one.
Did the mayor get it from you?
I don't think he did, because we always do the show on the phone.
Oh, okay. All right. There's no chance of that then.
That's one thing you cannot blame me for.
See, I was thinking about this last week when I was driving away. I'm like, the meadery, Rich does on the phone. I've done some on the phone just because of schedule conflicts and couldn't make it. Lots of people do it from the phone. I personally don't get the same vibe, the same experience. Like
it's not the same.
I'm standing looking at a piece of plywood because that's where the phone was screwed to the wall, and I'm talking about. I'm like, I just get I don't know. I get a better vibe. I can see the red light if someone calls. I now can look at the accurate clock to see how much time we have. There's just something about the phone. Not to knock anyone that calls in on the phone, but I personally get a different vibe from coming in.
Well, I'm glad I have more presence than a piece of plywood. I think that's a life goal.
Did I say that?
You applied it. You applied it.
I know you have a friend that listens just to hear me bust them for you.
You do.
And
yes.
So I want to live up to that.
Well, yeah, you usually do.
Alan
sir.
Carpenter, the plywood king.
The plywood king.
So today is Friday evening. There is a Master Gardener talk that's going on. And then tomorrow morning at 9 a.m., I got another Master Garden talk. So I put that together over the last 6-8 weeks. And last week I touched on some of the stuff like Prospera, basil coming, some of the phenomenal and sensational lavenders and stuff. And actually got we didn't get any calls last week, but I got a lot of kickback. People were actually listening. If you chimed in thinking you're going to listen to the mayor, I'm going to step in for the mayor and talk about something green. We have a couple other things coming that are kind of exciting that I put in the program, even though they weren't herbs, because in the past, and I think it was 2014 or something, the last time I did the Master Garden, because of both COVID and because I'm certain they have other speakers that are more interesting. So it's taken a few years to cycle around. And when I talked to the folks from Master Gardener, I said, I think I'll do about 30 plants. And she's like, whoa. You only have 30 minutes. I'm like, oh, okay. I said, have you ever listened to the radio show?
Yeah.
I can get 30 plants in 30 minutes. And she's like, I think that's a little aggressive. Don't you think that might be a little bit much to try to put in 30 minutes?
It sounds like a TikTok video.
So
30
I'm
plants
like,
in 30 minutes.
So if you know me personally, I'm like, are you challenging me? Are you saying I can't fix this? Are you saying this is broke irreparably and I can't do it? Yeah, I'll get 30 plants in 30 minutes. Yeah. So I think I have like 36 this time.
There you go.
I will get it in 30 minutes, and I'm going to tell a couple stories in there, and there's a surprise ending to the story as well. So if you want to come see the Master Gardener seminar, and I'm not the headliner speaker at all, and I out of no disrespect to the headliner speaker, I'm so poor a memory now because I say my brain is like a RAM in a computer, if we even talk about RAM anymore. Everything's just a chip. I don't know. Do we even use RAM anymore?
I don't know.
But if something has to be deleted before something else can go in. So unfortunately, there's too much in there. I can't remember.
I get that.
The headliner speaker's name today.
I totally understand.
She's going to speak about. She has a couple books. I did browse the books. I did the cliff notes on the books, and tonight she's going to talk about developing shade area gardens of the Science Center at there. But when I went through and did my program, I just couldn't stick to just herbs, because in my mind, when I did some research and looked through all the seed companies that I look through, the seed companies that we deal with, I'm like, well, I really struggle with the definition of new. I'm like, well, that's new to that seed company. That's new to that catalog.
Okay.
So there are some things, even genus, that are new that I just couldn't leave out. Okay, that's not an herb at all. It has nothing to do with herb. You're never going to put it in your tea, but I can't help I can't help to leave it out and not talk about it. We have some interspecific. I'm gonna back up a little bit and talk about the problems for the years that impatiens have had in downy mildew. One of the big hurricanes. Again, there was not enough RAM deleted to remember the name of the hurricane, but I want to say about 10, 12 years ago, one of them big hurricanes that drug through Texas from the Gulf, that had a big giant swath of dark green that went all the way to New York City. That's believed to be, and science is pretty confident that that's what pushed a particular strain of downy mildew right up through the Midwest, right up through the Northeast.
Okay.
That downy mildew has been really hard on Wallerieni, the seed-driven, traditional, old-fashioned. I'm sure your parents planted some impatiens across the line.
Everybody's parents did.
Yeah, that for a decade, it was like, oh, can we plant impatiens? Oh, my impatiens only made it to July. And then they literally, in about 7 days, turn into nothing but stems with no leaves, no flowers.
Right.
That's it.
Which is not attractive.
No. And at first, just I'll call the layman gardener that said, oh, I've been doing this forever, really had points of disbelief, kind of almost a little argumentative. Now, there can't be something wrong with these. I've planted them my whole life. Well, the environment, the hurricane, things have changed. Trust me when science has said downy mildew is here and it is not going away anytime soon. So the Netherlands shared genetic material with some of their impatiens over there. The Netherlands are very big green industry, ahead of us almost. No one in the United States wants to believe that somewhere is ahead of us, but some of the genetics in the European side, they're even keeping them in their own patents and not releasing.
Germany too, right?
And Germany is very, very assertive with their genetic program, and not to cloud that with doing crazy things like Dolly the sheep. They're just finding strains and finding sports or volunteers, if you will, of certain things, and they're very, very assertive at developing them into a commercial product. So the downy mildew was a problem here in the United States for literally a decade, if not more. And the follow-up to that was they started to use a lot more of the New Guinea style, the Hawkeye, which is a totally different, you're a carpenter, but there's a bunch of carpenters out there. They're not all the same, fortunately. And the Hawkeye side was the New Guinea impatient. So the genetics companies, the seed companies started really working hard to come up with really aggressive, blanketing, flowering, impatient plants that were from the hawk side, not the Wallerieni side, because the hawk side was totally immune to downy mildew.
Okay.
So then that got to be the rise of sun patient. Sun patients are, now I'm going to back up with a little bit of production, greenhouse production stuff. They are only produced by cuttings. So every time you get a plant, you have to take the tip off, you have to root it. Okay, very labor intensive, every time you take a cutting, it has to have a license and a royalty paid on every single one. So not only is it very difficult to produce it that way, it takes a long time and a lot of care and a lot of effort, a lot of investment, but then you have a royalty on it. Seeds generally are royalty free. The royalty is kind of embedded in when you buy the seed. It's not something you have to pay like 22 cents for every cutting you take. So they started working on that kind of impatient that performed and was disease resistant like your New Guinea impatient, again, all cutting driven, but they wanted to produce them by seed so that commercial producers like ourselves could sow a tray of 400 seeds and get a bunch of seed-born, seed-driven New Guinea impatiens that we could then sell at a much more affordable price so that the Wallerieni destroyed type of impatiens had a market to be replaced by the New Guinea. I hope that story kind of made sense.
But one thing that's interesting in that story to me is, and this is something that people who, amateur gardeners, make this mistake. They assume everything is down to the plant, right? It's all about the plant, when it could be a different environment, not just climate, different stuff in the environment. Tree diseases spread that way. Hey, that wasn't a problem 10 years ago, but it is now. And because it's something we can't see, it's something we don't think about. There's something wrong with my plant. Well, it might not be your plant.
I had this discussion with someone that was a previous, actually their father was a Christmas tree grower. And back then in the era, now this gentleman's older than me, so in the era that his dad produced Christmas trees, they produced all blue spruce. Well, that would be a real big roll of the dice right now because of the European needlecast. There's a disease that is attacking specifically blue spruce. So I think, and maybe I'm simply of this particular age that I don't remember the ones preceding. So don't Donald Trump check me. I'm saying that the first one that really made headlines, that really made that everyone in the green industry is like, oh yeah, was the Dutch elm disease.
Yes, I think
because
so.
The Dutch elm disease literally wiped out a species of tree in America that was everywhere and now is nowhere.
And it was a disease that wasn't here before. It spread here.
So that kind of is what gave birth to a bit more aggressive screening and saying, hey, we're going to have a commission to make sure that this stuff doesn't get in.
Yes.
But it still does. Lanternfly, I'm not even going to start on that one, but lanternfly is tough because it will actually lay eggs on a non-green thing, like a shipping container. It could be sitting, waiting to be loaded on a train, pick up the larva, and that larva then is brought in, to the train, to the intermodal, to the shipping, and shipped across. And then, 6 weeks, 6 months later, all of a sudden it hatches and it was brought. So they are struggling with that one because it's transportable with things that have nothing to do with the green industry. So they had to kind of reboot and say, well, we're screening all these plants, but that particular pest I'm almost positive it was originally a Southeast Asia area problem, is being shipped in on things that have nothing to do with agriculture or horticulture.
Right.
So that's the big problem with that. And then now that it's here, it's doing the same thing. You can go load your truck with refrigerators and accidentally move the lanternfly, which is bound to be very, very big problem here because it attacks grapes.
Which is sort of like what happened with Japanese beetles years ago.
Yeah, and now we just think of Japanese beetles as
part of the problem.
They're never going away. It is what it is. And
right.
I still, when I talk to folks, I'm like, the white grubs that you treat for, you're reluctant to treat for, that is your Japanese beetle.
Yes.
And a lot of folks are still like, really? Get out. That's where they come from? Yeah, I'm going to treat for grubs. I'm going to get rid of the Japanese beetle because they were an invasive species too.
Yes, they
I'm
were.
afraid like the lanternfly, once it's here, it's here. So we can go, we've gone on a tangent on disease, but it started with downy mildew, which I'll come back to where the seed-driven material comes from. We have lost the ash to I was going to say bronze birch borer, but that would be birch. That would be birch. That was my second point. My ram got ahead of where I was.
There you go.
So we Dutch elm disease. We have the bronze birch borer that has taken out a lot of the clump style, the river birch, and the emerald ash borer that is wiping out the older ash trees. The only asset I see to how resilient the ash is when I am doing work on our property, our open land. I see that emerald ash borer does not really seem to go after youthful plants. So those plants are still like when the elm or when the ash is killed in its older years, it will sometimes even sprout from the original stump, and that the borer does not touch it until it has that heavy, coarse bark that it gets underneath and it's behind and it tunnels.
So I didn't know that.
The soft tissue green. I'm not an entomologist. I'm not an arborist, or as far as talking. But I'm witnessing with my own eyes, being that I might pay attention to something, being my occupation, something a little bit different than someone just going for a walk in the field.
Sure,
certainly. Youthful stuff, even up to like 2-inch caliper whips that don't have that heavy external bark yet, seem to be unaffected by the borer.
That's very interesting.
The good thing I feel about the ash is that in this cycle of this plant, you may only have youthful trees that don't come to large, giant fruition, which is sad. But I don't think it's likely, from what I see right now, being that we've had this problem for probably 8, 10, 12 years, that's been noticeable. And let me tell you, the tree service companies know about it. The ash seems to be bouncing back in youth, and then when it gets to a certain age, it's attacked by the bug. So I don't foresee it being like the elm, where we just will not have ash anymore.
Yeah.
I think maybe there will be no old ash.
Right.
Then the needle cast from the Colorado blue spruce, that makes growing a field of blue spruce a total crapshoot.
Sure.
It's a total wild card because
Absolutely.
You could get it and it could just go right through your field and wipe it out. But again, much more prone in older trees. The youthful ones seem to 8, 9, 10 years old before they're at risk as bad for it. back to the impatiens. So that being said, like the world is constantly changing, pushing diseases from place to place with weather, the transportation that we have for goods and people and boats and everything has increased. Right? Like when you were a kid, it probably things, people, boats, RVs did not move at the frequency and the pace and the traffic
certainly
that we have now. So that instance of spreading is just so much more difficult to control. So what the plant world has done is come up with resistance or bred-in. Now, on the flip side, the positive side of that is our genetic ability to look for these markers and look for even in people and disease and things to preemptively look for and treat things has also improved. So it took a couple of years for and I'm actually wearing the coat today. The sales rep gave me a coat for Beacon because we were a trial grounds at Stan's for the original launch of Beacon. And they said, here, we're going to give you 1,000 seeds of each color. All you need to do is report back to us what you see. So we grew it, sold it, and planted it and grew it in our beds. And I sent pictures back of every single color in October. If you get your impatiens to October in Erie, you're doing something right. And Beacon was still in full bloom, no sign at all in any color of downy mildew. I grew some in the sun, some in the shade. So Beacon has been at the forefront of the genetic resistance to downy mildew. So impatiens are back. I can say that just in summary, like all that genetic and riffraff about disease and stuff, no problem. I can just tell you, you can go back to buying the impatiens that you had 10 years ago, and you don't have to shake your head and walk by them anymore and say, "Oh, I don't do that anymore," because they died for a couple of years. They did. They and what you bought was Super Elfin and Dazzler, and you're not going to see that really anymore. You're going to see Impreza and Beacon, which are the two genetic resistant seed-driven regular old impatiens out there. So over that period of time, there was what we look at the sun patients, or it's an interspecific, is what the true side. I said Walleriani, Hawkeye, whatever. Interspecific takes two. It would be like taking a Skarzinski and a Carpenter and making a Karzinski.
Right. Creating the most irritating person possible.
Yeah. So like our shows together. So interspecific takes two totally different types and puts them together and makes something that has the character of both.
Yeah.
This was put out there. Some patients struggled the first couple of years. I was not a fan at first of the habit of the plant. I'm like, oh, they got a good idea, but they haven't refined it. And that happens in plants. They'll put it out there saying, look what we got. And then go, ooh, yeah. It wasn't that good. And then 5 years later, they're like, oh, we've refined it. And that's where you constantly see the tag being like improved. I'm like, well, I bought this last year. It was clear, white, sun patient. But then it'll say improved. That means they found something. Like it used to be real leggy, real tall, and real spindly. Now you buy it after you say improved, and it's exactly what you wanted, but now it's compact and branched. Right. So they find a little bit of marker and keep tweaking it. So the first interspecific thing that hit the market that people still don't really understand is we'll have some folks that used to really be in love with ivy geraniums, and they have a list of problems. I hate growing ivy geraniums, and I use the word hate because I hate them. They are very prone to all kinds of root issues, leaf spot issues. If they're grown in the wrong soil, the wrong pH, if they're too much feed, not enough feed, they're really finicky buggers to grow. Yeah. We haven't grown them for years. Two reasons. One, they're such a pain in the neck. Two, the interspecific exists now. What the interspecific is the regular old zonal geranium and the ivy geranium married together to make interspecific. We grow Calliope series because we've had really good luck with it. It is the first kind of real mainstream big thing to hit the market with interspecific. So now, at the climax of explaining where I'm going with this, sun patients are pricey. They just are. Are they worth it? Every penny. They perform well. We've even switched all of our front displays even though it costs us probably 3 times what it used to grow like wave petunias and stuff. It's just so reliable. They're so vigorous. They fill so well. Their bloom cap on our plants that were in the ground this year, which are almost ideally cared for. They get irrigated, they
Sure.
get fed. They're in fantastic garden soil. So it's not a litmus test of how tough they are because they're very cared for, because we want the display to look good. But they were blooming still at Thanksgiving.
Yeah.
Because we didn't get a really hard freeze to knock them down. They even seemed to culture adapt to that cool weather, and they really didn't drop a whole lot of leaves. They're really tough. What Ball Horticulture has worked on in their lab is an interspecific that's just as good as Sun Patient. They're after that really reliable, really good bloom cap, very strong plant, but not have to take all those darn cuttings.
Yeah.
They want to be able to produce it easily, 1,000 in a tray, and then transplant them and have them come to fruition. There was Divine. That's what we were growing. That was that. It was a not an interspecific. It was a seed-driven New Guinea impatient. We grew it for probably 5 or 6 years aggressively because of the downy mildew issue. People wanted to say, I want to plant an impatient in this area, have a little bit of morning sun. I've always planted impatiens, but I'm tired of them all getting dead by July. So that's number one, that's not an issue thanks to the Netherlands. You have Beacon and Impreza. And number two, you now also have been launched something called Solarscape. Solarscape interspecific New Guinea impatient is just like the Sun Patient, but in a seed-borne area. You'll be able to get them in jumbo 6-pack, way more affordable than the Sun Patient because they're branded, they have royalties, and they're cutting-driven. The interspecific that we're producing this year, first year, so I don't have an impression on how great they're going to perform.
Yes.
I saw them in trial in Michigan. I was in Chicago. And in Chicago, they had them growing right under a tree in the shade, beautiful bloom cap, and then a connected bed right around the corner out from under the tree, great bloom cap, sun and shade.
But you know what, Josh? I mean, this is another reason, and I'm not going to charge you a nickel for this. This is another reason why.
I don't have it. Good.
Right? Sure, you got to run a business. This is another reason why going to Stan's Garden Center makes so much sense, or a place like that where you have people who really know what they're doing, because all that science we've heard for the past 22 minutes, in big box stores, they don't know that.
Oh, yeah.
They don't know. And you may go in and go, that's a beautiful plant. Oh, yes, it is. And you buy it and you take it home and it dies in July. Or, all of this expertise you don't get just anywhere.
So I'm not going to lump and say that, there's not a real valuable, knowledgeable, lifelong student of green material at a box store, because I'm sure there is.
Sure, there's one or two.
Generalizing box stores, they're using their green goods as a loss leader. So they really, truly want you to buy, 6 2x4s or, a gallon of paint. And they flyer the green goods, and they try to run the green goods out the door very quickly, very cheaply to get you in to say, I want these 3 arborvitaes for $10. But you generally, again, I'm generalizing. I don't want any hate mail for, hey, I work at Lowe's and I know what I'm talking about. They are out there, but generally speaking, green goods aren't their focus.
Yes.
There is literally a million other products that a box store is selling, and the green goods are just a department used as a bit of a marketing tool. Mm-hmm. And if I had the CEO of Lowe's, they'd be like, yeah, we don't really focus on the garden center. We focus on everything else. We use the garden center as a tool.
Sure.
I get it.
And the shopper may be somebody who's really informed, and then you can pick and you know what you're doing.
Yep.
But if the individual gardener goes, yeah, I know some, but I don't know about these interspecies. I don't know about, the what's resistant to what. That's where you go to Stan's.
So I find that, and I know like this time of year, there's probably 8 of the core staff that are responsible for making the crops happen. Mm-hmm. They're literally pulling out their hair saying, I don't want to do this next year. It's just so hard. It is a very demanding, difficult to go from 0 to 1,000 in speed and pace and get everything done, because the reason that we have been successful as a business is Erie has such a strong following of, not following, but a strong feeling of cabin fever. And when you come out of that, everybody wants to come out of their bear den and say, I'm going to plant my garden. I want to be out. I want it to look nice.
Want to be surrounded by lush vegetation.
It's been dreary for seemingly 11 months.
Yes.
I want it to green up. I want to plant. I like the hobby. So the thing that I'm going to say that we are different about is we have those 8 or 10 people that are passionate about the new stuff. We went to Michigan last year on a mini field trip. We drove all the way through the Michigan Gardens tour. I put on like 1,100 miles in 3 days as far as, going to all the different places and stuff. And when we got done, everybody was like, I had no idea the pace of what they're trying to put out. I said, that's why we went on the trip, because I'm trying to show us, other than having our head in the sand and saying, this is our little niche, this is what we grow, this is what we like to grow. There's so much going on out there. And being a student of that is passion. We're still passionate. Even the folks that have it in the back of their mind, like, I have 1 or 2 seasons left. I've done this my whole life. I don't want to work this hard anymore. We have staff that are looking at retirement. They're still, when it fires up, when the itch comes, and they're like, oh man, hey, can we get some of that new basil? Because I saw how great it's supposed to perform. We've had problems with downy and that in the past. Like, hey, can we get this? That all of a sudden seems to light up in our production staff.
Yeah.
The ones that have only been there 2 years, that it's kind of new to, and the ones that have been there for literally 32 years, it seems to light up right about now. You start seeing the Easter lily hit the bench. Everybody's like, all right, let's go. We're ready.
'Tis the season.
Yeah, we're ready to fire up. I want to talk about the new heirloom tomatoes, and the customer seems to start that off. You start getting the phone calls like,
sure.
Hey, do you have Monstera philodendrons in yet? Hey, do you have your pansies on the bench? All of a sudden, the phone calls start rolling, and it's infectious. It really is. So I like to think the difference between us and a box store is passion.
Yeah, I think so. And I mean, your customers are passionate as well. But, we talked a couple of years ago. I brought my mom to Stan's, and my mother is a frugal person. I'll put it in a kind way. And she said, these are really reasonable prices. And this is an incredible place to see that many plants and that many varieties, and that many people on a highly trained staff, and still have prices that are perfectly great. That's a big thing.
Internally, we have discussed pricing a lot, and there's a fear. There's a fear in business. Like, for me sitting here, the one that that does the checkbook,
right?
There's a fear because when you look at across the board, and everybody can look. I don't need to show you my balance sheet to say that. Whatever it is, diesel fuel going in the tractor, to the soil that we're planting in, to the plastics, which is oil related, to labor expenses, to needing more people this year because we keep growing more and more, to across the board, it's a terrifying thing from a small business farming industry to say, what if it rains 3 of the 4 weekends in May?
Right.
It can be literally 6-figure hit, and then where does the bills get paid from? It's a fearful thing right now because of the change in the market, whether you want to call it inflation or just the increase in the pricing across the board. It's become a very, very aggressive topic of conversation for, what may be a little bit too cheap because it's just costing so much more. Like, look at our gas bills and electric bills. We use for a small business, we use an extraordinary amount of gas and electric because there's almost 6.5 acres under cover now producing. So it's just gobbling up the resources. So it's a fine line between making sure we're still here next year and that all of the bills at the end of the year get paid, because what happens in this business is everything goes out, we produce all the product, everything gets grown, everything's there. There's literally millions invested in that green good, which is highly perishable. It's like, what if your grocery store bought 3 times the amount of lettuce every single week that it was ever going to sell? They're not going to be there long.
Right.
So it's a big gamble and a roll of the dice to make sure that we have both a reasonable expense and a reasonable price point that we can keep the customer happy,
and offer the quality you offer.
And offer the quality. Well, that's first and foremost. We're not going to ever want to offer junk,
right?
Even if it was at the point of making it more affordable.
Understood.
I'd rather have a $22 hanging basket that's absolutely gorgeous that you want to give to your mother on Mother's Day than have a $19.99 basket that just isn't something you want to give your mother.
Totally.
That's
Very
kind of
true.
that's where my heart is.
All right. And I'm going to let that be the last word, Josh. Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
All right. And I will see you next
Plywood
Friday.
carpenter.
Yeah, Mr. Plywood. That's right.